Hello, everyone. I hope everyone can listen to me and hear me, and also look at me and our esteemed presenters here. I am Ali Abbas from Islamabad, Pakistan. It's 9 p.m. here, and I'm a member of Extremely Together. First, I would like to introduce myself, and then Extremely Together, and then the esteemed panel of speakers that we have with us today. I am, as I said, Ali Abbas. I am a CVE expert. I've been working on the ground for about 15 years on matters related to CVE and PVE. For those of you joining from Pakistan, you might be able to recognize our work from the campaigns that we have done, Dil Se Pakistan, Pakistan Youth Alliance, Khudi, Hive, and the Jinnah Hologram project that we are doing these days. It is my pleasure to welcome Saji, who is originally from Sri Lanka, but right now is joining us from Doha, Qatar. He represents Search for Common Ground. And alongside Saji, we have Yasmine. Yasmine represents We Belong. She's the founder of We Belong, and she's the Young European of the Year in the 2019. They will introduce themselves later on as we move into this presentation, this discussion tonight. I would like to introduce Extremely Together briefly because this initiative is being carried out through Extremely Together. Extremely Together is a global youth movement against extremism that was conceived by the late Kofi Annan. He handpicked 10 young leaders from 10 different regions of the world and made them a part of this amazing initiative that tackles different kinds of extremisms across the world. So the unique thing about Extremely Together is that it talks about different kinds of extremisms, not just one particular kind. And it's a youth-led initiative. It's a youth-led movement. It's working all over the globe. Right now, it's in a pivoting stage of its life, 4 years on, because now we are building chapters in different parts of the world. So if you're joining in from Uganda, from Somalia, from Philippines, from Pakistan, we are building chapters in these countries right now, in the UK and also in the EU. So if you wish to join this amazing movement, be a part of it and contribute your efforts towards a more peaceful world, you can always join in. My colleague Sofia is here with us today. She would be helping us moderate and also give a brief presentation about this initiative and why we are doing it. So Sofia, over to you.
Thank you, Ali, and good afternoon, evening to everyone. I'm Sofia Anton from the Kofi Annan Foundation, program officer from the Promoting Youth Leadership and Transitions to Peace programs. We are today joining the Extremely Together digital discussions, which is a series of global online consultations for youth created by our Extremely Together young leaders to allow us to act on the changing landscape of violent extremism posed by COVID-19 and adapt on the constraints that the pandemic has placed upon young peace builders and activists preventing violent extremism. During 4 sessions and through an online survey that you can find on our website, we will gather young people's thoughts and expert advice to create solutions and recommendations together for a policy note that we aim to present at key international policy forums later this year. We had our first session 2 weeks ago, and it was about more like setting the scene and understanding the context of youth and violent extremism. There was a mutual reinforcing thoughts by our speakers and our 2 Extremely Together young leaders, Arisa and Björn, that COVID-19 has provided fruitful grounds for extremist groups to strengthen their presence and to take advantage of the uncertainty and the fear that people feel amid the pandemic. We have seen a drastic increase in online content by far-right violent extremists, where we have faced misinformation and disruptive narratives fueling hatred and exclusion. While youth has been one of the groups most affected by COVID-19, young people have also chosen not to settle to a role of passive victims. Rather, you have chosen to bring solutions, to take action, and to promote solidarity during a profound uncertainty that we are all facing across the globe. Today, we're going to continue this very interesting discussion with a very timely topic as we seek insights on how the pandemic is affecting youth-led activism across the globe and the efforts by young people in preventing violent extremism. The session is going to start with 30 minutes of panel discussion between our esteemed speakers and Ali, as he will guide us through the discussion to hear our experts' thoughts from Saji and Yasmine, and surely some inspirational personal experiences on the challenges and opportunities that COVID has posed on youth activism and PVE work led by young people. And then is time for discussion where you get to take part with the Q&A. You can share your thoughts and take part in the discussion by already submitting questions in the Q&A section, by posting your comments below if you're following Facebook live stream, and also using the hashtag #ETDiscussions, and continue the discussion later on also on social media by using the same hashtag. We want to collect as many youth perspectives as possible, so we also encourage you to take the online survey that we mentioned before, and you can have the link from our website. So with all this in mind, I hand it over to you, Ali, and for you to lead us to the panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Sofia, for that introduction. So as you see that at Extremely Together, we thought that the global pandemic, COVID-19, has really impacted our life in all its forms and manifestations, the culture, economy, peace building, you name it, everything is being affected. But a very important thing that it intersects with is violent extremism. And violent extremism, for those of you who don't know, is used interchangeably sometimes with terrorism. It's a different thing, but you can conceive it as such. We have seen that amid this pandemic, extremist organizations and extremist individuals are using this opportunity to spread their hate and spread their divisive narratives and trying to distribute the unity of the world. So we thought that it's very important for us to engage right now instead of waiting and be proactive. So I'll jump straight to the discussion. We have an amazing panel, a star-studded panel, international experts, and I would like to hear from them. So the first part of the discussion is more personal. We thought that you would like to hear stories from Saji and from the amazing Yasmine. My question to the speakers, the first question is, what inspired you to become who you are today? I mean, what's your story? What's your deal, really? And the second part of the question is connected, so you have to connect the two. The second part is that what are your primarily your reflections on the protests happening all over the world? We have seen BLM, we have seen Lebanon, we have seen Iraq, we have seen different parts of the world. And what is their relation to COVID-19 from your point of view? So Saji, if you could go first.
Want me to go first?
Sure.
Sure. So again, thank you, Ali and Kofi Annan Foundation for hosting this event, and also, shining a light on this topic itself and giving me a chance to speak as also. It's a privilege and honor, and I want to acknowledge lots of people who are joining us, taking time off. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to colleagues who are joining from the US all the way to Australia, I think. Just out of introduction, for me, the reason that motivated me to get into this is because I grew up in Sri Lanka, and I grew up witnessing several insurgencies and a war. When I say witnessing, it was about seeing the ugly side of human nature, people killing each other, murdering each other, burning each other, to seeing the good side of human nature where people helped each other, their enemies, and protected them. But getting more personal is where I also had a choice to take revenge and kill somebody. And that motivation also was an important marker in my progress in why I'm a peace builder now. So that was my entry into being a peace builder from a very young age. And I felt, and that's what I got involved when I came to the United States to study and understand this even more. I haven't figured out the answers yet, and I'm still searching. But I realized over the years that change takes many, many people and institutions, and it doesn't come overnight. It takes a long time. So as I think of the protests today, whether it's the United States, what's the protest movement in the US around white supremacy, linking to police brutality that has sparked in incentivized protests in other countries, or protests that have been going on in Sudan to Hong Kong and other places, is that they're not a new phenomenon, it's an old phenomenon. It is about young people wanting to be heard and wanting to be included, not excluded. So that it's an important point to bring out. But as we think about the COVID itself, it is showing us the naked truth. And the naked truth, I think, started when Secretary General of the United Nations alluded to the folly of war. And I would add, combined with COVID, it is showing the folly of force and repression coupled with racism that people cannot tolerate anymore. The more people are realizing that, the change will come slowly. But I think that there's a crack that has opened up in the system that was fully armored and shut, but now the cracks are starting to show, and that's not in one country, but in many countries, the crack is more visible. And I think that's important, and what has enabled that crack to do is to show who are the heroes and sheroes. No longer are we saying that a man with a gun or a man in politics is the hero of the day. It is the nurse, it's the teacher, it's a grocery clerk, it's a food delivery guy, the cleaners, the labor force. Young people are included in all of them. They are the real lifesavers and life givers. I think that is really important to recognize. Despite the ugliness of COVID, I think in this context, it's showcasing through the cracks who the real heroes are. And I think that creates an opportunity for us to think of this in different ways. I'll stop there.
Wonderful, Saji. That's very comprehensive. I mean, you summarize it in a very, very beautiful way. It gives a lot of thought. I mean, it inspires a lot of thought inside. So Yasmine, over to you now. What inspired you to be who you are, and how do you see the global protests and all of that?
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to share the panel with Saji also because, you know, Saji, you come from a very different context than me. You mentioned that in your country, in Sri Lanka, you were subjected sometimes to extreme violence. But, you know, I was lucky to grow up in Europe. I was born in Italy and I moved to France when I was 15. And when I moved to France, I discovered, you know, it was a peaceful society, of course. I wasn't in a war context. I wasn't in a dangerous environment. But I discovered the suburbs in France, which are poor areas, often out of the city, where people with immigrant backgrounds like me live. And I started working at the age of 16 in those neighborhoods and hearing often that people of my age would die because of police violence or because of criminality. And then when I was 18, in 2015, the terrorist attacks in Paris occurred. And I would say, unfortunately, I can't say this inspired me because it's not a good way to be. Like, I wouldn't say this is an inspiration. It was more a need justice because at the aftermath of Charlie Hebdo attacks, I was in the street peacefully protesting and, you know, demanding for peace. But I also faced the discriminations from French society, being afraid of people of color. And so, you know, we grew up in an environment where, especially in my city, which is Grenoble, it's a small city where I continued to see people dying, especially in my surrounding. I lost family friends just last year of 17 years old. And so, you know, we see violence around us, but we don't see a political change. And that's what motivated me to advocate at the European level, and then motivated me to become, you know, a European advocate. And so that's the main reason. Now, for when it comes to COVID-19, when schools closed, people like me, many immigrant sons, stopped going to school because they lost contact with the schools, with the teachers during COVID-19. And I was advocating for these people to even have access to one laptop. Some families don't even have access to the laptop. And we are in a European country. I mean, we have the means. We can't say, you know, we don't have the means as a state, the government. So I didn't see a strong response. That's the sad thing. And then very quickly, maybe to mention, the protests, for me, it's just the tip of the iceberg, because during the COVID-19, I've been very active denouncing police violence. It arose during COVID-19 for immigrant sons, especially in the Parisian suburbs. And then people started protesting. But it's when George Floyd died that the government, for the first time since so many years, acknowledged that there is a problem in France, police violence problem and a racist problem. So it's the first time, it's historical. We had a demonstration in Paris last week, 100,000 people in the street. It's a historical moment we're living in France, and I think we need to talk about peace here too.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yasmine and Saji. That's very inspirational. And we thought that we would loosen the talk up by asking you what inspired you, because many people, I'm seeing the chat right now. Many young people are saying I'm inspired and motivated already. So that's a win for us. The second part of discussion, guys, is how do you see what are the obstacles that have been created by the COVID-19 crisis to youth-led PVE work? What particular hurdles do you see from your work and from the work that you witness all around you? So same order. Saji, if you would like to comment first.
Sure. I want to preface, thank you, Ali. I want to make maybe 7 points on this, and this is something that we highlighted in our recently published policy paper that Search produced, but also other researchers have also talked about, including Mark Summers and others as well, just to summarize 7 key points at a top level and really create more time for us to discuss and go into the details of this. One is, I think, the lockdown restrictions combat COVID has hindered the ability of young people to mobilize in the peace movements, whether it's in Colombia, to Yemen, to Afghanistan, ongoing peace processes now where young people are having a hard time actually engaging, and it risks the faltering because of the pandemic itself. Second, I think is too much focus on the COVID alone means increasing food insecurity. When people are on lockdown, we are also seeing a hunger pandemic, spread widely as well. Third, I think is, I guess the increasing in technology usage and all that during lockdown creates openings for false information, exposure to violent extremist messaging and censorship. These issues were there before. They're not new. They are old. But now it is further magnified, and young people can easily fall prey, unfortunately. Others are like the weakening state. If states are weakened significantly and cannot provide sufficient health and education services like that for citizens because of the pandemic, and we see people go hungry, then the credibility of the state as a top leader is taking a big hit. This is where violent extremist groups could also respond with provisions like delivering food and health services and others, and we've seen that happen already. And it creates a really compelling case for who is actually legitimate. I think the fourth one, is the state repression. It's not new. This is also not new, but see this much more now. There's some states responding to coronavirus crisis with increased repression. The challenge to governments, I think, is when state repression increases, so do activities of violent extremists. So if states follow lockdowns with attacks on young people, what happens is young people are going to be more pissed off and frustrated with the government. Their credibility goes down even further when it's already low. The other ugly side of this, I think, is the migration issues. If states are weakened, with this increased repression, why would someone want to be there? So we see more and more young people moving from the cities. We see movement in refugee camps, IDP camps, seeking food and health and shelter. So there is no evidence yet what this is actually doing with COVID cases. But when you combine all the other ones of state repression, state weakness, and others, then it's a vicious cocktail. I think this is why the opportunity for states right now with COVID cannot be underestimated. If they actually rise to the occasion, they can take advantage and correct a lot of the mistakes they're making. But yet, only a few states we have seen actually are doing that well. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, Saji. So, Yasmine, the same question for you. What are the hurdles and obstacles that you see in your activism and in activism around you due to COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you. The main one is the growing inequalities, because the main people, as Saji said previously, at the forefront are delivery service personnel, are nurses, and often in France or in Europe, the work of, for example, even at the supermarket, the people at the front are the most, the poorest, the most vulnerable in terms of precarity. So for the youth, there will be a huge impact in the access to jobs, in the access to opportunities. I've been very happy of the response from the institutions, the European institution, even if it came late and it frustrated us. But I'm afraid that this can create a frustration added to the violence that that these vulnerable people can face. So you know, I remember at the beginning of COVID, I was advocating for mental health, for programs from the government to address this difficulty of being stuck at home. But right now, since I'm seeing all these movements of people and this racism and the way the government is dealing with it, questioning, even sometimes making controversies around the colonial past and not addressing the right issues, I'm afraid. I'm afraid that we will have to do a lot of PVE work, of prevention of violent extremism, because we are creating a frustration and an added inequality that can be then used by extremist group to advocate or to recruit new people. And so that's why I want to be sure that the national dialogue is installed, not only in France, not only in Italy maybe, but in Europe. And then, of course, in other contexts too. I think it's replicable, especially in the US. The way the government in the United States is dealing with this crisis, which is a racial justice crisis that we are facing, is shameful for a country like the United States. And I say it because we are going to have to deal with this trauma. And I myself, as an advocate, I am tired. I am tired mentally, but I can't stop, because that's all I stand for. But I imagine people who don't even have a voice, how might they feel now? And it's scary. It's honestly scary. I'm sorry to be negative, but that's how it is.
No, that's fine. It's fine. I mean, the realist part of you is when you are afraid, and that's when beautiful things also come out, So in that respect, I would also like to mention the situation in Pakistan, which is becoming very bad by the hour, by the day. And many people, many peace builders that I see, Yasmine, have been deemed hopeless. They're like, we can't do anything, we can't go out, we can't do a protest, we can't do a campaign on the street, So, but the thing is that an activist has to find whatever resources he or she can get and find creative ways to navigate their way through the problem. And that's what activism is all about. You have to constantly change your position in the battle. Just like a traditional war, there's an infantry, there's engineers, there's medical staff. You have to change and shift your roles. And that's, I think, something that is challenging us to become better, to evolve better as peace builders. And that's where the next part of the question also connects. And the next part is that we have talked about obstacles, we have talked about hurdles. Now let's talk about solutions. What creative ways you think are there, Saji and Yasmine, that young people are using or could use, in your opinion, to navigate their way through this very intersectional crisis that we are suffering from? I mean, it's unprecedented what is happening to the world. And the matters related to violent extremism are still there. The racial discrimination is still there. Gender-based violence is still there, and all of these problems exist. And now there's a big problem that kind of aggravates the rest of all problems. So what are the creative ways that activists, that peace builders can use or should use in order to navigate their way through this crisis? Saji?
Thank you, Ali, and I couldn't agree more. The intersectional issues, these are complex issues. I think there's a lot of examples. Our participants would also like to contribute to this, so I'll be brief here. Just want to share maybe 4 or 5 examples from what young people are doing to manage this, right? Young people see the world differently. Their leadership model is horizontal in nature, and it's collective in nature. Young people inherently have this collective impact model because their leadership style is horizontal. That's very distinct from the older generation that sees things in a very vertical way. So this is why I think young people's work is so timely and actually can make an impact. So for example, we see in South Sudan where young people are doing radio programs with adolescents and youth addressing disability issues, gender issues, educational issues under lockdown and others, but using WhatsApp to actually connect with each other and share audio messages. Borrowing trucks with loudspeakers on the streets and going into populated areas and talking about the prevention activities and stuff. So, mounted on taxis and cars. So it's a way that young people are saying, I want to make sure that people are preventing the spread and want to save lives. And this is one thing that they're doing. If we go from South Sudan to Cameroon, for example, this is just a snapshot. What started out from a local youth-led organization called Local Youth Corner Cameroon started as a one-hand hand sanitizer campaign. Why? Because there was the ability to access running water was difficult. So they actually created hand sanitizers and started to distribute them in populated areas. But what they did was map out who they are giving it to, what the older populations are, who are the high-risk populations, and mapped it out so that the Ministry of Health can get it. But then, knowing that the Ministry of Justice is one of the biggest challenging institutions at the state level with young people, this is where young people see the state of justice system as the perpetrator, and the justice system sees young people as perpetrators. They actually try to transform that relationship by working with the Ministry of Justice and getting them on board. And this way, they were trying to create better bridges, using the pandemic as an opportunity to build bridges with the state actors to actually say, this is something preventative that we want to do. I think that's a powerful thing. And in Sri Lanka, for example, we've seen lots of youth groups coming together across religious divides, coming together and trying to make sure they're raising money to feed the homeless, feed the poor and others, and trying to also link with the private sector to say, how can we make sure we see this opportunity as an income generation activity as well? And trying to get the Ubers and the taxi drivers in association to deliver the products that they produce and sell, but making some income from it too. So there are lots of creative things young people have been also doing to act on this thing. And then also from Afghanistan to other places, we see how young people are trying to keep alive the peace process conversations and creating letters, hope, and sending it to former combatants. So they're using this opportunity to really make some space. The last thing I would say is they're at a time when messaging is corrupted, news is difficult, Facebook and other platforms are being monopolized and manipulated. We see how young people are using other forms of communication to make sure that rumor is managed constructively. Fear is managed constructively. So we see young people as bridge builders and peace builders who are giving a sense of hope without actually giving the negative to rise up more. So it's a powerful moment for young people to use this occasion as a starting point to create that shift in the cracks I mentioned about. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Saji. Yasmine, the same question for you. What are the creative ways that you recommend or that you see around you that could be a good tool for activism?
Thank you. Thank you for this question. I think it's so important to direct our energy and negativity towards solutions. So, I think that the main way I see it is that all this light that is, directed on racial injustice is an opportunity. And this is why I'm super happy to work currently with the anti-racism and diversity intergroup of the European Parliament, where, I don't know if you heard about it, but 2 days ago, a member of the European Parliament, a Black member of the European Parliament, she was a victim of police violence in Belgium, in Brussels, where she worked. It's a huge shame, okay, for our European countries. She of course, explained it in the plenary, And I'm sure a response is going to be given at the political level now, because when even a Euro deputy is attacked as a black woman, how can we expect that our youth in suburbs is protected, right? So of course, there is an opportunity for change. We as young people have a responsibility to continue and advocate and push governments, because it's now then we can make things happen. You know, for 4 years, there is a family of a victim of police violence in France. She was advocating and the government discredited or ignored her. Now the government is hearing her. So, you know, it's now that we shouldn't, even if it's hard, even if we're tired, we shouldn't stop. So writing letters, contacting our political representatives, because they are the ones who should represent and work to defend our rights. We vote them for that. And then, of course, asking for, at all levels, for a fair representation. You know, I'm currently working in a company and they are addressing this issue. They're building an inclusion strategy. And I think it's a great moment for everywhere you work in, whether it's on media, whether it's on, especially on media, by the way, whether it's on private or public sector, call for diversity and inclusion. Even though I don't like the term diversity, I think it's a fun, a cool way to say that we need equality and equity. But, you know, make sure that we now create room for diversity, that we don't only condemn and put the hashtag Black Lives Matter, forgetting the real problem here is that we are not equally represented in society. This is what I can say from my European side, but of course I'm sure in many countries it's the same. I can also think about, you know, North African countries where sub-Saharan minorities are discriminated and are victim of racism, and there are so many cases in other countries. So I think it's a global issue, but we have a power as young people now to question our representatives, our political representatives. That's it.
Thank you very much for the work you do, Yasmine, and your valuable comments. Before going on to the next session, which is very important, guys, all of you here, you are a part of this discussion. It's not a webinar, it's not a panel discussion, it's a dialogue between us. Yeah, it's a conversation. So you have to ask questions. You wouldn't get this opportunity again. Saji the Great and Yasmine the Great are here, and you wouldn't get this opportunity to pose them live questions. So I would summarize what Saji and Yasmine have been saying. I see amazing creativity finally coming out as a result of this pandemic and the peace building issues. I've seen really amazing Facebook groups and WhatsApp initiatives and technology being used everywhere, even in Pakistan. For us, because we couldn't go offline, and that's what we do. I mean, we like to be on the ground and be campaigning on the ground, but we couldn't do that. It's now 4 months since I'm stuck in this room, you know. So what we did was we had to innovate, we had to create software, we had to borrow or buy software, we had to create the means to reach out to people, which we found to be more effective. Initially, it was a huge hurdle because we are not used to, I mean, sitting in front of a laptop and discussing about the world matters. But now I think we are getting used to it. And we better get used to it as early as possible, because it's not changing for a year or two. So that's why we have to use whatever tools we have creatively. We have to measure their impact, and we have to really focus on what matters. The next part of the discussion, guys, is question and answers. My colleague Sofia would be kind enough to moderate this question and answer session. A lot of you guys have already sent in your queries. You can direct a question to Saji, Yasmine, and myself as well, or you can ask a general question. So come on, and Sofia, over to you now.
Thank you very much, Ali, and thank you, Yasmine and Saji, for your great insights on these challenging issues that many young peace builders or activists are facing across countries, across regions. We have received quite a lot of different kind of questions, and I encourage all of you to continue submitting your questions on the Blue Jeans Q&A section, and also on Facebook if you're following the live stream. And we could start just by a bit more general question on from Mexico. Adriana Ramos is asking a question regarding the outbreak of the coronavirus and how it has dramatically changed our habits and routines. Insecurity, instability for the present and the future, and the reduced autonomy are common feelings. How we change from individualism to collectiveness. We could start with this general question and go more in depth afterwards. Yasmine, would you like to start with your thoughts?
Yeah, sure, definitely. That's a great question. From how can we change from individualism to collectiveness? That's precisely what I learned personally from the COVID-19. Before at the beginning, it was all about, oh my God, how will I do now? I was in the Netherlands, I had to come back to France. I am privileged. I know that some people are stuck in countries they can't even leave, and maybe they don't even have their family close to them. So of course, I learned to care about the others. I learned to share, because sometimes it's so easy to text people, but because we know we can meet them, maybe we're not gonna do it. And then because we can't meet people now, or at least we couldn't meet people, we are obliged to connect on the internet. And so I've been able to do Instagram lives, to keep in touch with these activists or people, or people that I care. And we learned how to care about the other, to care about these health workers. We were clapping every night in France, for example. So it's really a great experience. Of course, it was difficult. Of course, we had to adapt, and that's why I think we need all a mental health recovery from this. But it was also a moment that reminded us the importance of freedom and how lucky we are to be free, to move and go out. And so now when I go out and I breathe, I'm happy, right? So we change our way of seeing life, I would say. At least I did.
Thank you, Yasmine. Saji, would you have thoughts on this?
Sure. I mean, Yasmine answered this question well, and just to add to Adriana's question, I think is, like I said earlier, generally young people's ideas are horizontal in nature, which is more collective in nature. It has it's not a leaderless model, it's a leaderful model that young people embrace. So I think it's important to start with the assumption itself, right? That it's not true that young people are selfish, young people are not active. Young people are very active and actually selfless. So we start with that. Second, I think is this collective impact model has also some evidence of how it can be impactful. The starting point for that is to actually break away from our corrupt mindsets of what projects means, what budgets mean, and what we want to actually do. Move away from this traditional crappy NGO models that have really corrupted how we do work, to embrace more of this collective model of how to create change. I think that's where young people can pioneer this new work. And we see models in Nigeria, in Jos, we see models in Colombo, in Sri Lanka, where these collective impact approaches of young people leading this change by bringing different state actors, bringing community members and the private sector to change together. I think that is where I think it creates these new models of change instead of these NGO type models of change. I think this is where the opportunity is to shift this. And the last point I want to build on what Yasmine said is what COVID has taught us is the human side of things, right? What is most important for us? It's not important that we have a fancy car, fancy clothes. None of those are now so important anymore. It has shifted our mindset to see what's most important. What do we need to cherish the most? I think that creates at a heart level, not a head level, an opportunity to think of change at a human level. I think that's where young people are really pioneering this. And I think this is why I call to action for a lot of the young activists who are listening is to highlight this type of work more. Highlight how we are actually working collectively and making that change, because the world needs to hear that. If you don't say it, no one knows about it. And this is why my plea to you is, Jesus, in all kinds of ways, highlight that work so we actually can learn from it. Us old people can learn from it. I'll shut up.
Thank you very much, Saji, for your thoughts. I think to build on that, I'm sure that also among young people, there are a lot of adolescents who are looking ways on how to engage, but they are possibly lacking support or ways on how to become a peace builder or to take part. And we have a question from Claire O'Kane saying that asking how can youth organizations more effectively support young female and male adolescent peace builders and activists, as younger people are often keen on engaging, but they're lacking ways on how to do so. I don't know, Ali and Yasmine, would you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, definitely. When it comes to COVID-19 and how we can include people who might not be active normally. I've seen young people going out and delivering food to people who don't have the means. I can speak, of course, from my perspective, but I can't speak for for conflict areas because I don't live in one. But as I understand, emphasizing the importance of non-violence and peace, of course, we need to make sure that, everybody understands that we can achieve more together than apart, and excluding ourselves is not the solution. I've seen people in my city, very young people of 16, 14 years old, delivering like food to poor and homeless people during COVID, and it's people from immigrant backgrounds living in poor neighborhood too. But they know that sharing is, better than just isolating itself. So I will leave the rest of the question maybe to Saji. From my perspective, yeah, it's super important to engage with people that might not have, this tool, this power of, advocacy or being already active in society.
Ali, do you want to come in, or do you want me?
Sure. I would just like to, Saji and Yasmine have summed it up beautifully. No social change is possible without social interaction. Social interaction means that you have to interact with human beings. There's a beautiful African proverb that goes right in this direction. It says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. So if we have to reach far, if we have to build peace, if we have to make a better world, it's a long journey and we have to go together. We can't go alone. So, yeah.
I think for the adolescents question Claire asked, there's a couple of ugly truths that we need to identify as well. And one ugly truth is that young women, adolescent women, get double marginalized. They get marginalized by the adult women, but they also sometimes get marginalized among youth groups as well. So it's important to identify that ugly truth and see how to address it. And there are lots of ways that I think the starting point is to really show how supporting youth, adolescent-led efforts, targeted with them and supporting their actions itself. And there are lots of tools to do that. I can share. Claire knows that we've developed together, and she's also a big champion on this. So there are lots of tools to actually show how to support youth, adolescent-led efforts, adolescent male-led and adolescent women's-led efforts. But it's important to do that. But another truth I think is important to also highlight is that despite the ugliness, so a good truth is that some of the research we have done with youth-led groups is that there's gender parity among most youth-led organizations. Generally, young youth-led organizations are gender balanced, so there's equal number of men and women, youth, who are leading these organizations. I think something to kind of add to this is we shouldn't fall into this trap that I mentioned earlier about NGOizing this process. This is not necessarily about supporting adolescents through an NGO model or youth-led NGO model. Youth are transitional in nature, So there's no reason to actually make them look like us by becoming an NGO to access money. The international community needs to actually embrace new ways of financing young people's led efforts in a way that matters to them, not matters to us. If the international community believes in change, then we need to change ourselves, not demand young people to change to us. I think it's really important to articulate that and make it popular, because I think donors are starting to hear it and realize it, but don't know how to do it. So it also requires us as collective young people to actually suggest and engage donors not as a threat or a problem, but as a partner, because they don't know how to, they struggle. They need solutions from you to see how to make it happen. So therein lies an opportunity.
Thank you very much on your very insightful comments. I think it's great to hear also that there's room for criticism and also creativity in order to create positive and different solutions on how to take peace efforts further. I would like to change the discussion or direct it to a bit different direction, as we have limited time. And there have been some questions regarding digital platforms and the exposure of young people to violent extremist groups on social platforms. But at the same time, there have been remarks on how to address the gap that there are young people who have access on these platforms, but then there are young people who are completely away from internet connection, and how to then go forward with efforts on building peace and to work towards different kind of solutions to prevent violent extremism, for example. Would you have thoughts on this in a general way, and also more specifically how to protect young people, or how young people themselves can protect on the exposure that they face through social platforms by violent extremists? Yasmine, would you like to start?
Maybe Syed, do you want to have it? Because I wanna talk about violent extremism, but from the far right, from far right parties. But later, I want Syed to talk first, and then I talk. It's not really conflict areas, but it's another topic.
Ali, go ahead. Do you want to, or do you?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, it's a wicked problem. Wicked problem is in political science something that is very hard to solve, because it's a double-edged sword. If you do a lot of surveillance on the content online, if you censor a lot of content online, then the discussion around freedom of speech starts happening. And some extremists are so intelligent that they don't entice violence per se. I mean, they're legally minded, they're rational human beings. We have to look at extremists as rational human beings. They're not emotional people trying to kill you. Yeah, they have an agenda, they have an ideology, and you have to understand that if you're doing CV or PVE work. So my point is that there's increased state surveillance on hate speech world over. In developing countries, in Pakistan, now there's a law. It is easily reported, it comes down. But as a result of that, many extremists are now moving to the dark web. When they're moving to the dark web, it's harder to investigate, it's harder to research, it's harder to intervene. And that's where campaigning on digital media, that is mainstream, is very important. Sometimes I feel that digital campaigners, they become too generalistic. I mean, you have to be very specific about what exact narrative are you trying to counter, are you trying to challenge, and what conversation are you trying to inspire. A generic message like, let's have peace in the world, it doesn't work anymore. Even Taliban say this, even Taliban have said this multiple times, that we want peace. They never say we don't want peace. So a generic message of peace building, that the world should be in peace, doesn't make any difference. You have to research, you have to find push and pull factors, you have to identify exact entry points in your society, in your context, in your conflict, and you have to pick small battles in order to win the big war. And the digital campaign is very important. I'll give you my example. I started as a Facebook group in 2007. There was a military dictatorship in the country. media was banned, internet was banned. November 2007, we started a Facebook group. It was called the Pakistan Youth Alliance. We started protesting against the dictatorship and for democracy. Now, 13 years on, and we have built some of the biggest youth movements in the country. We relied on internet. We relied on the ease of communication that we have through internet, on the potential of campaigning and the potential of campaigning that we have from internet. And very recently, we started a very interesting project. I would like to give this example because many people might be inspired to do this. We are using the hologram technology. You don't have to go somewhere to deliver a lecture. You don't have to, with hologram technology, you can even reinvent people who have passed away. You can reinvent Gandhi Saab. You can reinvent Muhammad Ali Jinnah. You know, you can reinvent people who have passed away, make a hologram. They can go into the rooms and people can be, we have seen people crying as a result of that intervention. So technology has no end. It's evolving every day. You as a peace builder have to learn to use it in a proper way to its maximum potential. So that's my bit, yeah.
Happy to build on Ali's comments here because I think the questions, there were multiple layers to the question. Couple of quick thoughts. One is it's important to realize that change happens where people live. Sure, change can happen online, but change really happens where people live. Not in New York, not in the capitals, but in the communities that people live in. This is where violent groups or governments or young people are able to inspire people to act in some way or the other, whether it's good or bad. Second, I think it's important to challenge our thinking around this. Why is it that we enable violent groups to create the narrative and then try to follow and respond to it? Because it's sometimes a threatening narrative, people, I like it. But what is stopping us as young people around the world to create a new narrative that not what Ali is talking about is peace in the world, but peace in our communities? We want safe streets. We want mental health services. We want young people in schools. We want this, that. What is stopping us from creating this other narrative that is actually more hopeful, but done in a way that is much more engaging, that is people-centered, that actually gets more people involved? I think there's nothing stopping us from doing that. We have to be very creative. Technology can be a tool for that. The third point is around protection issues itself. Censorship is important and critical thing. And right now with facial recognition and GPS connections and technology companies selling and giving information to, they're not called law enforcement anymore, but police forces around the world to track activists, it's important to think of protection and safety issues. But at the same time, I think it's thinking of protection not necessarily from a physical protection sense only, but thinking protection as a prevention aspect is important. So there are lots of tactics we can see. We've known young activists who actually talk to each other, especially young women who go in groups to do protests and not go alone. They actually call each other. They also cover their face so that the facial recognition software doesn't. So there are lots of tactics like that. But if we only focus on physical protection, we lose the prevention aspects because we see violence in education. We see violence in all kinds of political spaces, economic spaces, and digital spaces. We have to think of protection in a holistic way. I know one of the participants, Katerina, who is here, and some of us are actually working on a global protection standard with the UN, so we can actually make sure that young people, young peace builders, and young human rights defenders have better alternatives when it comes to engaging without actually experiencing reprisal attacks by the state or non-state actors. So it's important to think of protection in its holistic way, not just physical only.
Thank you very much, Saji. And Yasmine, I understand that you wanted to also complement with your thoughts on far-right extremism, and then we would move to the last question after that.
Yeah, I will try to be brief, even if this topic would be a whole other panel. That's why I wanted first them to speak, because when we talk about violence and when we talk about online hate speech, as some of you might know, I've been attacked last year by the far-right leader in France. The far-right leader, a week later, we found out that in New Zealand, a terrorist attack occurred. We all heard it on the news. And the terrorist, he quoted Marine Le Pen. So, there is a link between the hate that is promoted by far-right parties in Europe and the response. Same thing, few years ago, I think 2 years ago, tragedy Macerata, the Macerata terrorist attack. We didn't hear it on the news, but it's a terrorist attack that occurred in Italy by a far-right politician, because he was on elections in Italy with the party of Salvini. He attacked and he killed migrants in Italy. So we have attacks toward Black communities and towards people like me that just are not considered European. And then we see hate speech online that I get it every day on my Twitter. And so when we have these trolls, these groups that are not even addressed and tackled as terrorists, in the US, every time there is a far-right attack, it's not mentioned as terrorism. It's mentioned as a crazy person. We try to find excuse to those white supremacists. Then we have a problem, because it means that there is a side of extremism that we're not really addressing. And I think that we need to discuss it more.
Thank you. And definitely, I think there's an opportunity also to continue many of the questions that have been expressed today in our Q&A, continue using the ET discussions hashtag, social media to continue engaging with these important insights that you are mentioning also, Yasmine. Just before we end, I would have a question for all of you. So just with a couple of words, what would your advice be to all young people in the audience on how best share their concerns and solutions with decision makers, and how to influence post-COVID reforms? Just with one summarized sentence, if possible. Saji, would you like to start?
Go ahead, Yasmine. Yasmine, or
ladies first this time.
Thank you. Okay. I think that if there is one message I want to share with young people, that I'm sure some of them are frustrated, sad, tired, or maybe just need for policy change. I want them to know that I'm with them. Don't give up. Stay strong, and don't give up in pushing for change, because change is possible, especially now. I know it's hard. I know it's hard to see all these movements going on, but it's a historical moment, and we should not surrender, and we should not give up on promoting peace.
Should I follow up? Maybe 3 key messages. One is continue to amplify young people's work as new day heroes and sheroes. We need to hear that more and more. Enough of giving oxygen to the wrong message, time to give oxygen to the right people, the right messengers. Second is run for office. Right now, only 2.2% of the parliamentarians in the world are below the age of 30. That is really messed up when the median age is very young. So run for office, not for Congress or major office, but school boards, the local governments. That's where change happens. So run for office, be brave and run for office. And it takes time, but have that ambition in mind. And third, I think, is we are part of a global coalition on youth, peace and security that is really collecting recommendations of how governments can be more responsible, either from a youth, peace and security standpoint, to shape policies at a national level that is inclusive of youth without seeing young people as a threat or a burden. So we are trying to create national legislation, we are trying to create national strategies and get governments to abide by them. So these recommendations that will come from this conversation will be very important, that we can actually get it to heads of governments in early next year. As part of it, this is an effort that is jointly led by young people, United Nations, agencies, and civil society actors. And then maybe the last message is, right now, what this pandemic has taught us is that these capitalist, greedy models have actually failed. If we are actually thinking of very powerful countries with strong economies, that model actually is a fallacy. because we can't go a month without a salary, without going hungry. So that means that this capitalist greedy model doesn't work. Young people have an opportunity to change that narrative. Look at new models like basic income models. Push for these new ideas that New Zealand and Finland are championing, because their basic income models are ways that people are not going hungry. Young women have access to sanitary pads, to education and mental health services that are essential. This is an opportunity to work with governments to do that. This is an opportunity to give these new ideas and give oxygen to them. Enough of giving oxygen to violent groups. It's time that we change the narrative, and this is an opportunity to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Saji, and I think that's a great way to conclude this Q&A. And thank you all, Yasmine, Saji, and Ali, for your great thoughts and creative ideas for all our young audience to continue building peace and finding solutions to these challenges that we are facing, despite the difficulties that COVID, especially now, is presenting. I would invite you all in the audience to join our upcoming sessions. We have the third session coming up on 2nd of July, where we're going to discuss developing youth-led solutions to polarization and tensions resulting from COVID-19. And we have a speaker from Facebook, Head of Counterterrorism and Dangerous Organization Policy for Europe, the Middle East and Africa, Dr. Erin Saltman. And then we have UN Young Leader for the Sustainable Development Goals, Mr. Ahmed Mbadr. And then session 4 is going to be our last session, 16th of July, our demands for our leaders and reforms needed for post-pandemic future. And this session is going to be held together with United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth, Ms. Jahatma Vikramanaya. So I invite you all to join our upcoming sessions and give the last words to Ali.
Oh, this is the toughest part, because my recommendation to young people watching this as a concluding remark is to listen to Yasmine and just listen to Saji. What they're saying is very important, but also stop complaining. I mean, there's a difference between activism and complaining, and we need to sometimes grow the hell up and make use of whatever technology, whatever resources we have to make a difference. Guys, the world is like drastically changing, and we young people are holding the line. We are holding the line between a very divisive world and a very polarized world. So it's very, very important that we use whatever technology, whatever resource we have, number one. And number two, I would leave you with this very mystical quote by Kabir, an Indian mystic: wherever you are is the entry point. So no matter what you do, wherever you are right now, whether you're a doctor or an engineer or a scientist or an activist, whatever you are, you have an entry point to create a more peaceful world. And this is it. Thank you very much.
So on behalf of the Kofi Annan Foundation and Extremely Together, thank you very much for joining our session today. Thank you again for our speakers, Ali from Extremely Together, and please all stay well and have a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you very much for your time, everyone. Have a good night, good day.